Of all the prophets mentioned in the Torah, the holy book of the Jews, Moses was the most activist, the one who mobilized the Hebrew people. According to what is written about Moses in the Torah, he was the one whom the Lord protected and cherished from the very beginning and whom he made his messenger. However, when we examine the life story of Moses, we find that it is very similar to the life stories of other historical heroes, which undermines the credibility of what is written in the Torah. The Exodus section of the Torah is the story of the exodus of the Hebrew people, or Habiru as they were known in Egypt, led by Moses and their journey to their promised land. According to what is written in the Torah, Pharaoh Ramses would not allow them to leave, and the difficult journey ended happily in Canaan after 40 years. However, I don't think this is the case. I believe that the Torah's chapters Genesis and Exodus, and some other chapters as well, were written after the end of the Babylonian captivity when the Hebrews returned to their homeland, as the themes and details in them show. The overpopulation of the Hebrews in Egypt was causing problems among the natives. All the sons and grandsons from Joseph, the son of Jacob, onwards had grown to about 600 to 700,000 people after many decades. This large and unwelcome Egyptian population was employed at very low wages in cheap mud brick making, masonry, and construction work, where second and third class people worked. The continuous increase in the number of Israelites had become a social problem in Egypt. So it makes no sense that Pharaoh Ramses wanted to prevent them from leaving the country. Nor is it logically acceptable to describe, experience, and explain the 10 or so warning disasters that occurred between Moses and Ramses during this struggle. What is rational is that Ramesses expelled the Hebrews from Egypt, and they wandered around with a leader for 40 years in a land the size of the Thracian region, during which time they were not accepted anywhere and eventually invaded Canaan. The number of men they had and the experience they had gained in the wars they had fought during their exile had made them strong and capable of invading a settlement. A copied legend is told about Moses in the Torah. In the relevant period, Pharaoh ordered newborn male babies to be thrown into the Nile in order to prevent the Hebrews from overpopulating. The Torah writer's imagination demanded such an explanation as part of the scenario. However, if you look at the logic, it is women, not men, who are effective in increasing the population of a community. Reducing the number of girls instead of boys could have been a solution for population growth. Moreover, instead of throwing them into the Nile, castration, a common practice in Egypt, would have been more effective than throwing male babies into the river. It was not out of creativity that the author of the Torah tried such a story about the birth of Moses. He was merely relaying a story he had heard from mythological legends. The story was entirely derived from a legend about the birth of Sargon, king of Akkad. According to the legend, Sargon was born to his mother, a priestess, and left in the river, where he was later rescued and raised by a laborer. Later, in his youth, he was visited by the goddess Ishtar. The story of Moses was not very different. He was left in the Nile by his mother. One coincidence after another, he was rescued by an Egyptian princess, and by chance, his mother was taken to the palace as a wet nurse. After growing up in the palace, Moses was made an apostle by the Lord in his late teens. While the expulsion of the Hebrew people from Egypt by Ramses would have been a more appropriate scenario, the author of the Torah dramatized the event and preferred the story of fleeing the country. Moreover, the forced detention of more than 500,000 people, whose presence in the country is unwanted, reduces the credibility of the book, which is considered sacred. According to the book, Moses kills an Egyptian ruler as a result of an accident, so he flees Egypt and goes to a country called Midian. He marries the daughter of a man named Jethro and has 2 children with her. Meanwhile, the Lord, who appears to Moses as a bush, tells him that he will help the Hebrew people in Egypt through him, and that Moses must lead them to the land of Canaan, which he has promised them. Moses does not believe the Lord. It is not clear what his reasoning was, but a talking bush must have seemed normal enough to him that he still does not believe in the Lord. Interestingly, in order to convince Moses, the Lord first turns the staff into a snake and then turns the snake back into a staff. But Moses still does not believe. Is Moses very clever, or is he a very difficult person to convince? The Lord does not give up and tells him to put his hand in his sheep. When he takes his hand out of the sheep, he sees that it has turned white. When he put it back in the sheep and took it out again, his hand was back to normal. It must have been a strange God that the Lord had to use magic and juggling to prove himself to Moses. The Lord shows Moses all his power, but Moses is still not convinced and asks him to appoint someone else in his place. Moses remains unconvinced, but finally, the Lord gets angry and reprimands Moses, and he is no longer able to object. At the Lord's insistence, Moses asks Jethro, his father-in-law, for permission to go to Egypt. Fortunately, Jethro grants permission. Otherwise, there would be no Jewish people today. The Lord of the Torah is clearly not an understandable God. Normally, according to today's level of intelligence, what is expected of a powerful God is to breathe into the soul of his messenger the work he is to do and to give him the courage and ability to do it. Moses, on the other hand, is asked to turn the staff into a serpent in the face of Ramses and make Pharaoh fear him. The Lord also makes the following statement: "When you return to Egypt, see to it that you do all the marvelous things before Pharaoh with the power I have given you, but I will make him stubborn. He will not let the people go." Is the Lord mocking Moses? Not only does he want him to lead the Hebrew people out of Egypt, he tells him to do magic to do it, but he also gives Ramses the power not to be impressed by it. I think the problem is as much with the Torah writer as with those who read and believe in the Torah. Exodus chapters 1-4. Moses spoke to Pharaoh about leaving Egypt with his people, but Pharaoh would not let them go. Why did Moses need to ask for permission with the divine power of the Lord behind him? The Lord had brought some plagues on Pharaoh for refusing to let Moses and the Hebrews leave Egypt. While these plagues were happening, the Hebrews were still standing. Why? According to the order written in the Torah, the Hebrews stood still and watched as the first plague, the turning of the Nile and all the waters to the color of blood, the death and stench of the fish, took place. When the frogs invaded Egypt, the Hebrews stood still. When mosquitoes and horseflies brought disaster to Egypt, the Hebrews stood still and waited for permission from Pharaoh. Even when the plague came in Egypt, killing all the animals in Egypt except the ones the Hebrews owned, the Hebrews did not move a step. Even when they had horses and donkeys to carry them away and Pharaoh's army had not a single animal left, did it not occur to them to flee? The Hebrews stayed put while all the people of Egypt, except the Hebrews, suffered from festering boils. In the countryside of Geshem, where there was not a hailstorm in all of Egypt, the Hebrews stayed put. And when the locusts left no grain, no grass, no trees in Egypt that they could not eat, did it not occur to the Hebrews to take advantage of the opportunity and flee? Even during the 3 days of darkness that came only to the people of Egypt, the Hebrews did not run away. Finally, after the plague of the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh allowed the Hebrews to leave, and the Hebrews kept the Passover and set out to leave Egypt. Before they left Egypt, Moses and Aaron decided that this was a holiday for the Hebrews, and they celebrated it as Passover. This is important in 2 ways compared to other religions. First, in Christianity, the time when Jesus was crucified and his spirit ascended was celebrated as Easter, just like this Passover. Both are celebrations that follow a period of fasting. The place of Passover in Islam has 2 different forms. The first is the analogy between the Jews' observance of the first day of the first month of the year before a long journey and the Hijrah in Islam. When Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina, he considered that day as the first day of the first month of the year and used it as the Hijri calendar. The second way is that the fasting of Eid al-Fitr and the celebrations that follow it are the same as the fasting of Eid al-Fitr in Islam, although they fall on different dates according to lunar movements. The Torah writer also explains the ritual and practice of this celebration, which is described as Passover. Moreover, he also explains the times and ways in which it should be practiced from now on. It has now permanently become law. That night, the Hebrew people received orders from Moses and Aaron to leave Egypt. By giving a small detail in this chapter, the Torah is laying the groundwork for something that will happen in the future. In later chapters, the Hebrews will try to worship Moses on the mountain while he meets the Lord on the mountain, and they will try to make a golden cow and worship it. The question may arise in everyone's mind as to where the Hebrew people, drowning in poverty in Egypt, got so much gold. That is why in Exodus 35:36, it is written that the Hebrews asked Pharaoh for gold and silver, and the Egyptians gave it to them, and the Hebrews robbed the Egyptians. The Lord asked Moses to dedicate to him the firstborn of every living creature belonging to the Hebrews. Moses gave the command to his people. All firstborn, male, from children to animals, were to be dedicated to the Lord. The Hebrew people, led by Moses and Aaron, set out one night in the month of Aviv, spring. Their route was to cross the Sea of Reeds into Canaan. That is, they would travel approximately 100 kilometers. This was a distance that a large group of people could travel in about 2 months, 60 days, stopping for days at a time. Moses left Geshem with his people and traveled south towards Sukkot. Then they turned north and stopped at Etam. Their goal was to pass through the shallowest part of the Red Sea marshes, a place called the Sea of Reeds. According to the Torah writer, the Lord had a vengeful character. For it says in chapter 14 that the Lord was still going to make Pharaoh stubborn and go after the Hebrews. The general scene was like this: the Hebrew people in the front cursing Moses and Aaron for their plight as they fled in haste. Pharaoh Ramses and his army in the back with their chariots. The chariot horses surviving the plague where the animals died is another interesting case. And Moses trying to calm his people. The Hebrews are marching with children and animals. The angel of the Lord, although until this chapter in the Torah, the Lord has taken care of all the affairs and all kinds of troubles. This is the first time in the Torah that the angel comes into play. Sends a cloud over the groups because those coming behind them are faster with their chariots. The cloud creates light on the Hebrews, enabling them to move forward, while darkness covers Ramses' army, preventing them from seeing and restricting their movement. Moses arrives at the Sea of Reeds and, at the Lord's instruction, holds his staff over the Red Sea, and it splits in two. The Hebrews walk out through it. When the Egyptian army following behind them entered the same channel, the waters closed again and the Egyptian army drowned and perished. The Red Sea is now on the other side. There were no more problems with Egypt and Pharaoh on the road ahead. Now a new order will be established in which the foundations of the Jewish religion will be laid and the commandments and forms of worship will be determined. In order to describe this process, the author of the Torah had to portray the Hebrew people as 40 pilgrims on a journey to Canaan. We will watch the foundations of a religion being laid in 40 years of travel across a piece of land that is normally the size of Thrace.